The delivery guy looked confused holding 3 pallets of custom brackets in the rain. I wasn't. I knew damn well they weren't supposed to arrive until Friday, and I also knew Trent had approved the early shipment to impress some investor clown with a mock assembly demo, without telling anyone in logistics. Again. So I threw on my jacket, grabbed the clipboard, and went outside like I always did. 25 years at Greyridge, and I could still lift a dolly better than most of the warehouse boys. The wind whipped hard through the loading bay, but I didn't flinch. You don't build a company from nothing by being delicate. I was hired by Robert Gray when his corporate headquarters was a cinderblock office above a bait shop, and the only thing fancy about our first board meeting was that someone remembered to bring folding chairs. I've closed vendor deals in parking lots, patched together supply lines with duct tape and prayer, and once talked a customs agent out of flagging a whole shipment just by showing him how our pressure valves worked. Greyridge wasn't just a job, it was mine. Every damn bolt and process and fire drill policy had my fingerprints on it. I was the company's quiet backbone, the one Robert trusted when things got messy. I wasn't in it for the spotlight, I was in it because I believed in it. Robert knew that. That's why I never had to remind him I was there. But lately I could have put a foghorn on my emails and Trent still wouldn't have noticed. No reply, no CC, not even a thanks when I rerouted his botched vendor contract last quarter and saved us 30 grand in penalties. He started holding meetings I wasn't invited to, then acted surprised when things fell apart without me there. I'd laugh, but it's hard to find humor when the whole ship is steered by a guy who thinks profit margins are just vibes. By the way, real quick before we go further, if you're one of the 97% listening without hitting that subscribe button, now's your chance. It doesn't cost a thing, but it sure as hell helps the crew telling these stories sleep a little better at night. Anyway, that night I stayed late. Again. No thank you, no acknowledgement. Just me and the hum of the vending machine in the dark, nursing a lukewarm coffee while correcting a parts order Trent had screwed up again. I glanced at the framed photo on my desk, me and Robert, covered in machine grease and grinning like fools, the day we shipped our first international order. I never moved that photo, never replaced it with the cheap motivational posters that HR liked to hang after Robert passed. The office didn't feel the same. The soul had shifted. Since Robert's death last year, everything had slowly turned sterile. What used to be camaraderie now felt like performance reviews with passive-aggressive smiles. The walls had more QR codes than character. And Trent? He waltzed in like he was auditioning for a commercial. Nice smile, expensive haircut, zero follow-through. He didn't know the names of the machine floor guys. He called accounting the nerd cave. And he kept using the phrase legacy baggage in meetings, never to my face but just loud enough. I didn't say anything, not yet. When you've seen as many storms as I have, you learn to let the clouds roll in first, because every smug little exec thinks they are a hurricane, until they meet the levee, and me, I am the levee. The text came at 9:03 a.m. sharp. Hey Linda, can you swing by my office at 10? HR will join us, nothing major. I stared at it for a full minute before muttering, well, isn't that just the brunch special, served cold with a side of betrayal? I knew. You don't loop HR into a casual chat unless you're about to play executioner with a smile. I wore my navy blazer, the one I hadn't taken out since Robert's funeral, and pinned on the brooch his wife had given me after our first successful quarter. Call it armor. Not for Trent, though, for me. When I walked in, Trent was already sitting behind the desk like a kid playing CEO in his daddy's swivel chair. Across from him sat the HR manager, Kelly, young, polite, and visibly uncomfortable. Her face was pulled tight like she'd just swallowed a throat lozenge full of secrets. Linda, Trent started, folding his hands like he practiced in front of a mirror. This isn't easy, but well, we've been looking at company structure, and we think it's time to bring in some new blood. Fresh ideas, new energy. You've had a good run, that was it. Like I was a relay runner passing the baton to a kid who couldn't find the track. You've had a good run. I waited. No offer to consult, no transition plan, no celebration of service. 25 years reduced to a tossed-off cliche like I was being rotated out of a bingo night. I looked at him. I didn't blink, I didn't cry, I didn't even flinch, I just listened. Let the silence settle. HR shuffled her papers and cleared her throat, offering the world's most generic severance packet like it was a bouquet of sympathy flowers. You understand, right? Trent said, forcing a smirk that couldn't hide the twitch in his left eye. He expected a reaction. Rage pleading some tearful breakdown he could cite in therapy someday. Instead, I nodded. Okay, that's all I said. No drama, no parting speech. I walked out with my spine straighter than his resume and my dignity sealed tighter than our old vacuum pumps. I didn't pack a single box. My desktop computer stayed on. My inbox still full. My sticky notes still clinging to the monitor. I didn't erase a thing, not because I forgot, because I chose to leave it. Let Trent try and navigate the systems I built without the manual I never wrote down. But I did one thing. I stood at the threshold of my office, hand resting on the light switch, and glanced once at the photo on the wall, me and Robert, young and filthy from a day on the shop floor, laughing over some busted compressor. I didn't take it down, I left it there. Let them see it, let them remember who actually built this place. I walked through the office like a ghost no one had earned the right to haunt. People looked up from their cubicles, pretending not to know. No one made eye contact, not even Tasha, and I didn't blame her. Trent had already made it clear. Proximity to me was radioactive. The front doors hissed shut behind me. I didn't look back. You don't need to slam the door when you're already holding the deed to the house. 3 days later, I was sitting across from my lawyer Marvin, in his windowless office that still smelled faintly of mildew and cigar ash, even though he quit both a decade ago. He wore the same oatmeal sweater vest he always did, one with the frayed hem that made him look more like a substitute math teacher than the legal shark he actually was. I didn't speak much, just reached into my bag, pulled out a padded envelope that had been tucked in my file drawer for 10 years and slid it across the table. Robert had handed it to me himself, back when his hands still had strength and his voice could still clear a room. I remembered exactly how he'd said it. For a rainy day, Linda. Just in case someone forgets who actually helped build this damn ark. Marvin arched an eyebrow as he peeled it open, unfolded the paperwork, and then, somewhere between page 2 and the embossed notary seal, let out a long, satisfied whistle. Well, I guess today's forecast is perfect. Inside was a bomb wrapped in legal velvet, an addendum to Robert's will, notarized and quietly filed, stating that in the event of involuntary termination, I was to be granted a 10% ownership stake in Grey Ridge Systems, effective immediately. Silent partner. Binding, no wiggle room. The kind of clause Robert wrote with the deliberate malice of a man who saw a storm brewing long before the clouds formed. I sat back. My hands were steady. My rage wasn't hot anymore, it had cooled into something far more dangerous, precision. I don't want headlines, I said. You won't get them, Marvin replied, already flipping open his leather-bound notebook. But you'll get justice, that I can promise. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 25 years. I opened a brand new spreadsheet, this time from my kitchen table instead of my office. Not a single cell for inventory or vendor codes. Just one title at the top, observations. I started tracking everything. Public board filings, when they were submitted, who signed them. Vendor updates, delays, shortages. Partnerships suddenly announced with sketchy third-party firms I'd never heard of. HR patterns, open positions ballooning, exits not replaced, entry-level hires with resumes built entirely on buzzwords. I wasn't bitter, I was awake. Like someone flicked on the floodlights at a poker table I'd been sitting at blindfolded. Now, I could finally see Trent's bluff for what it was, a scared little boy playing Empire with someone else's blueprint. Each morning, I brewed a strong pot of coffee, pulled up Grey Ridge's public-facing dashboard, and watched as Trent tried to pilot a ship he'd never even learned to steer. I knew the rhythms of that company like I knew the sound of my own breathing. Every deviation, every bloated expense report, every reshuffled title without a clear job description, it all went into the spreadsheet. I didn't contact anyone yet. No whispers, no vengeance posts. I wasn't some jilted employee stewing in a robe. I was a silent partner with a loaded chamber, waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger. And when you've spent your life making other people's problems disappear, you learn the quiet power of invisibility. No press, no spectacle, just pressure. Applied exactly where it hurts. Don still used the same leather wallet he'd had in 1998. I spotted it when he pulled out his card to pay for lunch at the steakhouse where Robert used to hold impromptu board meetings, always over something medium rare and a glass of bourbon, even at noon. We sat in the corner booth, away from the noise. Don looked older but not dull. Still had that sharp ex-Marine edge like he could detect BS through drywall. We hadn't seen each other in years, but I skipped the small talk, told him what happened. Just facts, dates, names, Trent's exact words, we need new blood, you've had a good run. Don didn't blink for a long time. Then he picked up his steak knife, turned it in his fingers slowly, and muttered, new blood, huh? Hell of a way to thank the company's heart. I didn't ask for help. I didn't mention the 10%, I just told him I'd been let go, that I was fine, that I was watching things from a distance. He nodded slowly, the way someone does when they've already come to their own conclusion. Tried to schedule a quarterly sit-down with Trent last month, Don said. Kid showed up 20 minutes late, called me old school 3 times, and pitched some AI vendor from Miami who misspelled armation on their proposal cover sheet. I didn't laugh. I didn't have to. Keep in touch, Don said before we parted. If things get weird, let me know. 2 days later, I met Helen at a small cafe on the east side. She wore her usual oversized sunglasses and spoke with the same clipped elegance she always had. Former finance shark turned angel investor with a spine of reinforced steel, Helen never wasted a second on sentiment. We sipped coffee and I gave her the same calm download. My exit, Trent's rise, his growing obsession with optics over operations. Her mouth pinched halfway through. You were terminated, she said, like the words themselves offended her sensibilities. I nodded. Trent says the company needs to modernize. Helen leaned back in her chair. Robert would be livid. He may have loved innovation, but he worshipped competence. Trent wouldn't know competence if it mailed him a fruit basket. She picked at a biscotti with a manicured nail. He hasn't returned 3 of my emails. And last week, I got an auto-generated response when I requested the annual audit summary. That was the clue I needed, not confirmation. Alignment. Helen was annoyed, Dawn was wary, neither trusted Trent. I'm not planning anything drastic, I told her, just watching, making sure the house doesn't burn down. She gave me a look that said, if it does, make sure he's locked inside. We talked for another half hour. I never mentioned my ownership stake. That wasn't for now. Now was about making sure the ice beneath Trent's feet was good and thin, and stepping back to watch him dance. When we said goodbye, Helen reached out and held my hand for a moment longer than necessary. Whatever you're doing, Linda, she said, keep doing it. Quiet power is still power. I walked back to my car, the sun dipping low behind me, and jotted a single note into my phone. They remember who I am. More importantly, so do they. It started with an invoice for brand immersion retreat in Aspen. 5 figures, no deliverables, just vague descriptions like synergistic onboarding and vision elevation. I nearly dropped my coffee when I saw it tucked into the quarterly expense report, buried under a dozen vague line items labeled development consulting. Trent had launched something he was calling the innovation division. No clear product, no roadmap, just a slick logo, a Pinterest mood board of buzzwords, and a vague promise to modernize Greyridge's market presence, which apparently required avocado toast bars and experiential brainstorming sessions in ski lodges. I didn't get angry, I got methodical. Trent's biggest weakness was assuming that the past wouldn't check the books, but I had the muscle memory of how Greyridge bled cash and where the tourniquet had to go. I called Tasha. She picked up on the second ring. I could hear the hum of fluorescent lights in the background, distant tap of spreadsheets, and the sad wheeze of our ancient breakroom fridge. Miss Harper, she said, voice small but bright. I was hoping I'd hear from you. I asked if she had a minute. She said she had 20. I drove straight to a coffee shop near the plant where I knew she took her lunch. Tasha had started as a data entry intern back when people still used fax machines. I'd trained her myself. She remembered. When we sat down, I didn't have to ask twice. She pulled out her personal USB drive like it was sacred. I didn't want to bring this to anyone internally, she said, eyes darting toward the window. But he's bleeding us dry. The file was meticulous, expense logs, approval chains, vendor mismatches, and inflated contractor rates with no sign of actual work. One consultant was being paid double our senior engineers and hadn't submitted a single report. Another was Trent's college roommate, now branding himself as a strategy whisperer. Tasha leaned in. We're not just over budget, we're burning through reserve capital. He's moving money out of core operations to fund whatever this is. I closed the laptop gently. You did the right thing. I kept it clean, she said. No company systems. All from public filings and the finance server logs I still have read access to. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. You've got a future here, Tasha, one way or another. Back at home, I opened the file again with Marvin. He poured us both a stiff drink and said, if I didn't know you better, I'd say this looks like sabotage. No, I said, flipping through the screenshots. Sabotage would require intention. This is just pure arrogance. Marvin pulled out the official shareholder protocols. You're over the threshold. 10% gives you the right to call a special meeting. I nodded. Then we call it. We started drafting. Invite wouldn't mention the real purpose. Not yet, it would look routine, just another quarterly check-in to discuss minor performance issues. But the timing would be deliberate. The wording neutral. The kind of email Trent would skim past without even reading the CCs. But the attachments, those would hit like a freight train. I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration. Greyridge wasn't just a brand, it was a legacy, my legacy. And if the board didn't have the spine to course correct, then I'd show them how to transplant one. Click by click, we prepared the stage. The receipts, the bylaws, the vote mechanics, not rage, not ego, just cold, unshakable math. You don't need fire to burn a kingdom down. Sometimes silence and a spreadsheet will do. The subject line was harmless enough. Greyridge Systems Special Shareholder Session, Q2 adjustments, no bold fonts, no all caps panic, just another beige meeting in a sea of beige meetings. Marvin had drafted it himself, legalese so dry it could sand wood. But every sentence was a scalpel. It mentioned operational restructuring opportunities, fiduciary realignments, and leadership impact analysis. All technically accurate, all weaponized with precision. We sent it from the company's registered legal address, CC'd the board, legal counsel, and Trent's executive assistant. Made it look routine, like a bump in the fiscal road. Trent's reply was exactly what we hoped for. A thumbs-up emoji and a forwarded calendar invite with add to deck. In the subject line, he didn't even ask what it was about. That morning I sat alone at a corner cafe, sipping a black coffee so bitter it felt appropriate. I flipped through my notes, clean, color-coded, stapled like scripture. Behind me, a couple argued about almond milk. Someone's laptop kept dinging with Slack messages. It all blurred, my hands didn't shake. At 9:42 a.m., I stood, folded the files into my leather binder, and walked to the car. My reflection in the cafe window caught my attention. A tailored gray blazer, pearl earrings, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. Not the Linda who spent her nights fixing forklift logistics and filling in for lazy procurement VPs. This was the Linda Robert used to call his silent hammer. At 10:06, I walked through the front doors of Greyridge Systems like I'd never left. The receptionist, a new girl I didn't recognize, froze halfway through offering me a visitor badge. I smiled. I won't be needing one today, Han. The meeting room was full. Trent sat at the head of the table, legs crossed, flipping through a tablet like he was rehearsing for a product launch that didn't exist. Dawn and Helen were already there. Dawn gave me a nod so slight it could have passed for neck cramp. Helen sipped water, unreadable. Trent didn't even look up when I entered. I didn't walk to the employee side of the table. I didn't take a folding chair near the intern from compliance. I walked to the shareholder side, the half circle where the real decisions get made, and pulled out a chair between Helen and Dawn. The silence was instant. Trent finally looked up, blinking like someone had just turned on the lights in his fish tank. Linda, you're here? I am, I said, calmly opening my binder. It's a shareholder meeting, isn't it? Don cleared his throat, not even bothering to hide his smirk. Helen spoke next, voice cool as dry ice. Let's get started. Trent looked illegal, but they were already flipping pages. No interruptions, no protest. Just a room full of professionals pretending they hadn't just witnessed a tectonic shift in the power structure. I sat with my legs crossed, pen in hand, spine straight. No small talk. No throat clearing, just presence. The kind of presence that doesn't ask for authority. It reminds you it already had it. The meeting began like any other. Agenda read, roll call murmured, coffee lids clicked open. Trent cleared his throat, ready to deliver another slideshow of inflated metrics and vague promises about next-gen vertical integration. He didn't notice Marvin standing near the far wall, briefcase in hand, calm as a priest at a funeral. Helen nodded toward me. Linda, you had something to add? I didn't look at Trent when I spoke. I looked at the table. At the paperwork. I'd like to formally submit documentation confirming my 10% ownership stake in Greyridge Systems, I said, sliding a stapled packet to each board member. Marvin stepped forward and placed a certified copy before the corporate council, the seal catching the overhead light like a dagger in a courtroom drama. An amendment to the late Robert Gray's estate, Marvin said, voice smooth and practiced. Miss Harper's stake was designed to activate upon involuntary termination. The language is airtight, witnessed, notarized, and filed with probate years ago. The room dropped 10 degrees. Trent scoffed. This is absurd. We never approved you didn't need to, Marvin interrupted. Robert did. As sole majority owner at the time, his authority was absolute. Trent's jaw clenched so tight I thought his veneers might crack. This is some backdoor loophole. No, I said, finally looking at him. This is foresight, something you lack. I turned to the board. As a shareholder, I'd like to raise a motion. Don leaned forward slightly, eyes sharp. I move that we liquidate the innovation division due to its sustained underperformance and unchecked expenditures. I further motion that we open a formal review of current executive leadership based on recent fiscal irresponsibility, vendor instability, and a marked decline in investor confidence. Helen didn't blink. Don crossed his arms. Trent jolted upright, hands flailing. You can't just walk in here, and I didn't walk in here, Trent, I said, voice steady. I was always here, quietly, legally, and now officially. He turned to the legal team, desperate. This is sabotage? No, Helen replied coldly, this is accountability. Don looked down at the documents, then at Trent. These numbers are real, the expenditures, the consultant pay. This isn't a witch hunt, it's math, Trent's voice cracked. This company needs vision. This company, I said, needs solvency. The room held its breath. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum quieter. You fired me to erase the past, I said, locking eyes with him. But Robert made sure I'd have the last word. I turned back to the board. We vote now. Marvin didn't need to speak again. His job was done. The truth had entered the room, and it didn't need permission to speak. The vote was silent, just hands raised, pens scratching, eyes locked on printed motions, but it felt louder than any boardroom shouting match. Helen raised her hand first, calm and deliberate, like someone closing the lid on a box labeled enough. Don followed a beat later, chin high, fingers tapping his yes onto the page with the same casual finality he used to sign million-dollar contracts. 3 votes in favor, 1 abstention. 1 against, Trent, of course, who muttered something beneath his breath about board politics and betrayal, his voice brittle like a windshield spidered with cracks. Motion passed. Language was simple. Immediate cessation of non-performing division operations and temporary suspension of current executive leadership pending financial audit and board review. No embellishments. No grandstanding. Just corporate guillotine poetry, phrased in the bland monotone of minutes destined to change everything. Trent stood, pale, eyes flicking across the room, looking for an ally that no longer existed. You're making a huge mistake, he said, trying to summon authority he no longer owned. I've been modernizing this place, turning it into something future-ready. Helen didn't flinch. You've been playing with matches in a fireworks warehouse. Don closed his folder. We're not in the business of salvaging ego, Trent. We're in the business of running a company. Trent stared at me, unblinking. But the fire in his glare had guttered into confusion, like he couldn't believe the old fixture from down the hall was now the one holding the cord to his parachute. You think this is over? He hissed, voice breaking. No, I said quietly, but you're over. He stormed out without collecting his tablet, his notes, or the water bottle he'd insisted be cucumber-infused. His footsteps echoed down the hallway like a slow retreat. A new silence filled the room, not tension, not victory, just stillness. Like the air after a long electrical storm when everything holds its breath. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply stood, gathered my binder, and pushed my chair back beneath the table like a guest who knew she'd be returning soon, but not on anyone else's schedule. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the storage floor. The same maintenance guy who used to hold the door open for me every morning was there, older now, but still chewing the same brand of gum. He nodded, I nodded back. My old office had been emptied months ago, turned into a wellness nook, someone said, with succulents and a diffuser and a sad little sign about gratitude. But in the storage cage, still sealed in bubble wrap, was the framed photo. Me and Robert, young, tired, elated. That first production day after we met quota for national contract. We were covered in grime, Robert's tie hanging around his neck like a noose of survival. That photo had never meant legacy to me until the moment I lifted it from the crate. I wiped the glass with my sleeve, carried it with both hands. No fanfare, no applause, just a return, not to the past but to what mattered. 1 week later, the lobby doors parted like they remembered me. No visitor badge this time. No sidelong glances, just quiet nods from the receptionist, from security, from the plant supervisor who once showed me photos of his twins before they were born. The place felt different already, less rehearsed, like it had exhaled something toxic and was finally breathing normal air again. I didn't go to my old office. I went to the executive wing, to his office. The door was already propped open, the nameplate removed, leaving a faint rectangle of dust like a tombstone scrubbed clean. Inside, no more beanbag chair or faux vintage motivational posters. The vision board had been taken down, its pushpins clinging to one last curled corner, before I tugged it free and dropped it in the trash. I stood in the center of the room, eyes tracing the crown molding Robert once insisted on installing himself. The sunlight hit the floor just like it did the day he handed me the rainy day envelope. Full circle, but not nostalgia. More like justice with a paper trail. 10:15 sharp, I called Tasha in. She stepped in cautiously, clutching her tablet like a lifeline. "You've been keeping this place afloat," I said. "Time you had the title to match it." Her jaw dropped. "Wait me, you've earned it. Finance director, effective today. Salary bump, access privileges, everything." She blinked fast like she was afraid if she moved, the moment would vanish. "And Tasha," I added, "you're not his finance director. You're ours, build it your way, but keep it lean. Keep it smart, and keep the receipts." She nodded, eyes shining, and left to notify HR, probably for the first time in her life, eagerly. The rest of the day was quiet but relentless. I reinstated internal audit rotations, froze contractor budgets, reauthorized the engineering team's prototype budget that Trent had slashed to fund catered brunches. I met with compliance, rescheduled every quarterly review with department heads, one by one. I unjammed the gears. No speeches, no grand rebranding, just repairs. At 6:02 p.m., the office was quiet again. Just the hum of the HVAC and the faint clicking of some poor soul in accounting, probably cleaning up whatever vision Trent had left behind. I closed the office door, Robert's door, now mine, and crossed to the window. The factory floor was visible from here, just like he liked it. He always said, "If you can't see the work, forget why you're here." As I stared out, watching forklifts glide between pallets and someone in a yellow vest wiped their brow with the back of their glove, my laptop pinged. Subject, request for shareholder approval, new CEO candidates. I didn't open the attachment right away. I just stared at the subject line, let it sink in. The old machine was finally turning towards something new. Not fast, not flashy, just solid. Real, I smiled. Funny what new blood looks like when the lifeblood is still in the building. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the coffee pot strikes again.